Hey everyone, it is late at night and I am Norman. I just received a new watch. And you know it's going to be an interesting video when I have to preface the video by assuring you I do like this watch. And I still absolutely love the brand. However, I was a little bit in shock when I saw this piece. What watch am I talking about? My brand new Nivada Grenchen Antarctic 35mm. Look at that piece. Yes. So what was my problem when I first saw this watch? Tonight I'm going to be doing my first impressions of this watch, and I'm going to begin by explaining what in the world I'm talking about when I say that I was shocked when I saw it. And I feel like part of the issue that I had less to do with this watch and more to do with watches that I've owned in the past. So when I opened up the box and saw this piece, it reminded me a lot of the $15 India watch that I had, that I've since sold off with some others as pieces that can be used for watch servicing to one of you. And that was a great looking piece. The case was brand new on it, super polished, but it was a $15 watch. So the fact that when I saw this, a not $15 watch by any means, the fact that it reminded me of a $15 watch was a little troubling. It also kind of reminds me of the Timex Marlin, but that watch was designed to look vintage and be vintage size, so that makes sense. So I continued to ponder what in the world my problem was, and I think I know what the issue is. So let's take a closer look at this watch and I'll explain. Alright, so here is the Antarctic 35mm. And yeah, that is 100% vintage looking. And the size is 100% vintage as well. So it took me a while to come up with a theory on why I kind of freaked out when I first saw it. Why I had a Nomos moment. If you don't know that story, back when I purchased the Nomos Orion Anthracite, it was and still is the most expensive watch I've ever purchased. However, at that time, I hadn't learned my lesson about black dial Bauhaus watches. When you see these watches online and not in person, you need to remember that those photos are taken in light boxes, so really bright lighting. The hands and indices look like they're nice and bright and visible, and in some cases, they even look like they're painted white. But I've only seen one instance where that's the case, and that was with the Zeno Bauhaus Winder. The hands and indices were painted white, which is phenomenal, and I'm still on the hunt for a smaller piece like that. They do have a ladies variant, but they're really small, so hopefully someday I'll find something like that that's that minimal. That watch didn't even have a minute track. It was just so Bauhaus, but so big. So I had kind of a Nomos moment with this watch where it wasn't quite what I expected, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was, except that it reminded me of the India watch that I paid $15 for, or $20 for. And as I was looking at it, I think my initial shock had to do with the polishing. Because this was brand new and the polish is so highly glossy, highly polished, and there's so much of it. It's like so perfect that it almost looks cheap. Kind of like when you're watching a movie in high definition and it looks like a home video because it's so crisp and clean. And I think that might have been my initial shock, which is good because in time this case is going to develop those little micro scuffs that all polished cases get. It'll still look polished, but if you look closely, there'll be little tiny micro scratches on it, just little hairlines everywhere that you don't notice at all, but I think it'll tame that so overly polished look. I mean, there's just so much of it here. I mean, the Nomos again, it was highly polished as well, but there wasn't much of it. It was mainly just the lugs. The Max Bill is like that, but it is all dial. So I really think that was my initial problem. But the more that I've worn it, the better this thing looks. So yeah, I think it might just be a case of purchasing a piece sight unseen and it looking a little bit different in person than in the pictures. But I mean, there's a lot of polish even on the dial with those applied indices. It does have brushing on the sides here, which really elevates it. The Tank Americains by Cartier have that feature, and it just really makes those watches look great. And they did an awesome job on this case. This design is something you would see out of the likes of Christopher Ward. How it's not just a flat case, there's this center piece that goes through there. And then some case elements above and below. I like how they did the bezel here. So when I first was thinking about the polishing, I was pondering what kind of brushing could be done here and there that wouldn't ruin the vintage aesthetic, but would kind of elevate it because of that contrast. But I really couldn't think of any that wouldn't just ruin this design, because there's no room for a brushed edge on the sides of this bezel, and to raise that would be a shame. It looks good how it's so subtle here, that division between the bezel and the case. The font is super fun on this watch, and when I do the full review of it, be sure to check that video out, because there is lume on this watch. Just like the F77, it's not great, but on this watch, it's actually kind of creepy looking. It's really cool. So keep your eyes open for that video, because I'm going to do a lume shot in there, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Another interesting thing about this watch is the crystal. So this is the only contemporary piece I have that is really styled like vintage watches that I own. The Max Bill is done fully vintage, but it looks nothing like any other vintage watch that I own. So I've really gotten to see what it's like to essentially have a vintage piece with a sapphire crystal. The Timex Marlins have an acrylic crystal on them, but this one has that kind of look with sapphire. And to me, it doesn't look much different. I mean, AR coating will give sapphire a different look from acrylic, but this pretty much looks like what an acrylic crystal would look like to me. But I'm not really an aficionado on that, and the differences don't bother me. I know a lot of people really prefer the look of acrylic over sapphire, but I just don't see it. However, I feel like there is something mental, something in our mindset that's a little bit different, because this does feel different than pieces that have acrylic crystals on there. It's not a visual thing, but it's just kind of knowing that it's sapphire is kind of interesting. I don't think it's a negative thing, because this is just a brilliant crystal, but it is interesting to realize that there's sort of a mindset difference between the two more than anything else. But again, like I said at the beginning of the video, don't get me wrong, I love this watch. I was just kind of in shock at all the super perfect polish that's everywhere. And so I think that just has taken a little while for me to get used to. But I put it on a shell Cordovan strap, that just arrived the other day. And it's the perfect length. I've become a stickler for ordering straps where you can specify the length of them so that I can get it dialed in just right. And this one is like that. It has quite a bit of taper, so I've had to order some more buckles so I have choices in that regard. Those aren't going to be here for another month or more, but I'll play around with those. But this is actually a shop out of the US. It's not from Vietnam. I do like me some Vietnamese straps. However, it's nice to not have to wait potentially 2 months for a strap. This one arrived within a week. Look at that case back. That is so cool. Yeah, this brand is doing amazing things. But yeah, I'm going to spend some more time with this, continue to get used to it, and I'm sure love it more and more because already I look down at my wrist and admire it and don't really see that kind of shock that I originally had. Before I let you go, let me get some wrist shots. In keeping with tonight's theme, I am wearing the F77. Yeah. I still am absolutely in love with this watch. Absolutely amazing looking. Let me take this off and we'll see what the Antarctic 35mm looks like when you're wearing it. And there it is. That is beautiful. This is what the 35mm Antarctic looks like on my 7-inch wrist. And so that you can understand exactly how this size watch fits aesthetically on your wrist. My wrist is 55mm wide. It's nice and thin, and it just absolutely looks like a vintage piece. I love it on this strap. Yeah. You get a shot of the polished sides there. There's the polished side, which is a great subtle contrast. I purchased this thinking it would be a black dial sister watch to my vintage Tudor, and that might have also been part of my initial shock. I mean, what can compete with that watch? That's my bad. But yeah, this is gorgeous looking. Look at that. Amazing. So there you have it, my brand new Nivada Grenchen Antarctic 35mm with the black dial. This is an amazing looking watch. Once I got over my shock at all of the super hyper polished metal that's visible on it, I think in time, like I mentioned, when it kind of breaks in and gets those micro scrapes and scuffs that polished cases always get, I think it's going to look far more natural and more worthy of the price that you pay for these. And when I do my full review, I'm going to show you the bracelet that this thing shipped on and how amazing it looks when it's on the bracelet. And in that full review, I'm going to point out the one actual beef I have with this watch. And it's a pretty serious one, so keep your eyes open for that video. Thanks for watching.